Your rig is where you work, where you rock out. Your rig is your livelihood. So when that DPF light comes on, give your rig the respect it deserves. As for Road Warrior, stronger seals, better manufacturing, and it's made of metal that lasts. Less downtime and more miles on the road so you can haul longer. Respect the rig. Become a Road Warrior.
Welcome to The Long Haul, the podcast dedicated to empowering small carriers and owner-operators to drive their business forward. I'm your host, Adam Wingfield, bringing you insights from industry leaders, real-world success stories, and strategies to help you navigate the road to profitability. Whether you're just getting started or looking to take your fleet to the next level, this is a show where trucking meets opportunity. So buckle up, it's time to go the distance. Welcome to The Long Haul, where we get past the headlines and into the headwinds. And today we're talking about a word that gets thrown around a lot, but rarely backed up, and that means trust. Our guest today is someone who understands both sides of the freight relationship between broker and carrier and has seen how performance data can either win you lanes or keep you stuck chasing the spot market. He's got years of experience helping small carriers build their freight book, get off the load board treadmill, and stand out with hard proof, not just good intentions. If you're tired of the he said, she said games in the industry and ready to win lanes through consistency and clarity, this is an episode for you. And before we get rolling, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast and head over to freightwaves.com/playbook to join a newsletter where we break down the market, compliance, and growth strategies every week for small carriers just like you. Without further ado, you've probably seen his business stamped over every single picture on X right now when it comes to data. The CEO of Search Carriers, Mr. Garrett Allen. Welcome to the show, Garrett.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
And Garrett, give us the audience. Let's take us back because, there's some, your product here is now, is at the limelight of the industry, especially with some of the high profile things that are going on. Take the audience back. Give us a backstory. How did you get into the freight world and what keeps you working with small carriers?
Yeah, so about 10 years ago, back in 2013, I started out actually at a brokerage out of Cincinnati, Ohio, called Integrity Express Logistics. I was a really early hire there, like hire number 50 at the time, kind of fresh out of college, kind of a tech kid. They had a very quickly growing brokerage, and their tech stack wasn't really keeping up. So being kind of a fresh kid out of college, I pitched them on, hey, if you give me the resource and the team, we can build you a new tech stack to help scale with your brokerage. Kind of long story short, they gave me the team and the resources. I spent about 8 years there helping them scale to a top 25 brokerage in the industry. I built a TMS they run on today, built their team out and everything. And then from there, went and worked at a freight tech startup you might have heard of called Transfix as a senior engineering manager for a couple of years on their brokerage side back when they had the brokerage. So a lot of overseeing, again, kind of the TMS side, also working with customers directly on, building out things they need there and moving the freight. And then from there, went and started my own business and kind of like jumped into doing my own thing, which is something I'd always wanted to do, just using all the knowledge I'd learned over the years in freight and tech and kind of like merging those all together. So, last year, or I guess earlier this year, I was working on some projects where we had to build another integration to the FMCSA data sets. And, it was like the fourth time I've done this. Anybody that's on the tech side especially understands that pain. And I was like, you know what? I don't want to ever do this again, build this integration. And I don't think anybody else should have to either. So I kind of put it together as an API and as a UI that people could come in and like look up the data I'd put together, and really got a lot of traction. And just kind of kept adding to it over and over, just, pulling in new data sets, servicing new UI pages, making it mobile friendly. And one of the other big differentiators is, it's got a very big free tier. So, with Search Carriers, that's one of the big differentiators is you can go on there today, just log in with your phone. You don't have to log in, just go to searchcarriers.com on your phone and you can look up any of the information you have, and it's all aggregated and standardized. And, a lot of people, that was kind of new in the industry. We're so behind the times, this feels like a lot of times in logistics, with just the data, just in general with tech, but especially with the data just being so hard to find what you're looking for, and it's not always consistent, and it's kind of took off. And so, now we're here.
That's the cool thing about what you've built with Search Carriers is you're taking, you really just took a problem and you put a solution with it. And one of the problems is how antiquated, how convoluted the data is from the FMCSA site. You got to go multiple different streams, go here, go there. And obviously their website alone, I think that their website probably has got to be the most cumbersome and like the most ridiculous when it comes down to navigating through. But you've been able to pull the system together, create a beautiful UI, simple, easy to use. Now what's crazy is that you go on X, and that's the biggest platform. That's where I met you on. You go on X, you don't, every time you see a truck, like you see a picture of like somebody using search carriers. I mean, how does that feel? Like, it's gotta feel pretty good.
Yeah, it's awesome. I love, seeing people use it in the wild, and I get messages all the time on X or LinkedIn or people sending feedback through the site just saying like, hey, hey, can I get this other report? Or like, this would be cool to see this here. And just like having that engagement with users is like, that's what I live for, man. Like that's the most fun for me. If somebody's sending me that message, hey, can you do this for me? And then, hey, a couple hours later, it's live on the site and they're like, oh, this is great. I love it.
Yeah. And that's the crazy thing about it is that as you continue to evolve that, it really kind of helps connect the dots. So in your experience, what would you say is the biggest disconnect between brokers and small carriers?
Between brokers and small carriers, I think, getting into sort of like the broker and carrier relationship, I feel like when you get down to it, brokers, a lot of times, one of the issues, I guess, kind of like not to jump totally straight into fraud, but, when we get into like that side of the world, a lot of brokers don't care who they work with. They're just trying to move the freight. And like at the end of the day, when we talk about like the issue of fraud and like, how do we actually solve the problems? As long as brokers have the ability to work with the cheaper carrier, like some brokers are going to work with the cheaper carrier and they're going to get scammed and fraud's going to be rampant. And so, I think when it comes down to finding ways to fix the relationship between like a small carrier and the brokers, we need more tools that are highlighting good small carriers.
Right.
Because a lot of the time when like, you look at like X, like you're talking about, and you see like the people talking about fraud and they got search carrier stamped on it. A lot of it's like, hey, this guy's got 5 companies at this little apartment complex and like probably whatever, a chameleon carrier or whoever, fraudulent. And we don't see a lot of posts about like, hey, here's a small carrier that's got their website's clean. They've got a domain. They got their email set up, their Google business profile. Like they've got good inspections, good safety ratings. Like this is a great person to work with. You don't see that getting posted or shared. And, it's funny. We were talking earlier this week, Adam, you'd asked me to pull some like good carriers to like maybe try to do some highlighting on this side of things. And it was like, what, this is actually, it's hard to do. It's hard to find, just a really good small carrier. And, I think we really need like more tools there to bring like the good small carriers to show them how to be, have a good digital footprint, be easy to find, and then also highlight those so that the brokers know who to go work with so that they're not just posting to the load board and saying, whatever, I'll take that one for a couple dollars less. They're looking and saying like, oh, I saw this guy got highlighted recently as a good carrier. I know what I'm looking for to find them. And like connect the dots there better. And I think we need more tools like that in the industry.
The thing is too, like, that you're right. We do need tools like that in the industry, but what moves views and clicks better than, oh man, this guy's, his last name is this, and he has, 5 different MC numbers or whatever that may look like. I think that the problem with that too is that, we as a society, we're entertained by bad stuff though. Like it's a bad systemic culture though, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you want the most clicks on X, it's the drama, right? I mean, a lot of the big platforms that are out there in this space, a lot of times they live on the drama between brokers and carriers because like that's what gets people riled up. That's where they want to pick a side. They want to have favorites. And you're right. That's what all the biggest accounts on X, most of them are not, positive vibes. Like, hey, this is a great guy. It's like, hey, look at this horrible thing that happened. Look at how bad this guy is. Like that is where you get the most attention. And it's like that classic story of why does the news always run, the negative stories instead of like the positive ones. It's like the exact same thing.
What are your thoughts? So you've been, your platform now is being used to identify a lot of the bad stuff that's taking place. And whether it be Hope Trans, whether it be Hawk, which were 2 very high profile cases, it really drove a couple of things. It drove the sentiment of the ELP, and obviously what's happening with that. But it also drove for more angst amongst that and around the call to action. When you talk about, let's talk about ELP for a moment, because your platform really has been used to say, hey, look, Florida's done this and Georgia's done this and Tennessee is doing this. Where do you stand with that? What are your thoughts on the ELP as a whole? Obviously, it's a rule, but what do you stand on that?
Yeah, I mean, I made my stance pretty clear, I think, on X when this was really hot, which is basically, it is a law. It is one of the rules, and so it should be enforced. And I think it's really as clear cut as that. Is if something is a law, we need to enforce it. If we're not going to enforce it, it should be removed. So really, the two positions I think should be either A, you're fighting to have that law actually removed, or B, you're fighting to have it enforced. I don't think there's any scenario where it's like, oh, we don't really care, whatever, it's fine. And so to me, I think it's great that we're trying to enforce it more now. I think that that's the right call. And I think if that's not, as far as like, is that law right or not? I guess I don't know. It seems to me like it makes sense for people to be able to speak English, but that also gets into the nuance of what is being able to speak English and read sign. Like, there's a lot of bias there, which I think is kind of hard to overcome. And, yeah, it kind of on that topic, one thing that I think is very interesting in sort of this vetting space of carriers, kind of talking about, search carriers and, whoever else out there, is a lot of people talk about trying to rate carriers objectively, and not just objectively. I think with search carriers, one of my goals is to be as objective as possible. I'm sure everybody else kind of feels that same way. But it gets difficult when you look into, we were just talking about what is a good carrier, what is a bad carrier. You can't really just be objective. Like there is a bit of like a vibe check. Yeah. Like there is some piece of that where it's like, hey, I called this guy, I talked to him on the phone. He seems legit. You've done all your other due diligence as well, but like there is a piece of like, they seem like a good person. They seem like a legitimate carrier that you can't just quantify with data necessarily. And I think that's where we get into the trouble of, if you try to just be objective, you're not diving deep enough. It makes it easy for the bad guys to just cheat your system. But then when you start trying to, put your opinion in there and your bias, then you start cutting out people that could have been good carriers. Like it gets really tricky. And I think that really, when you boil down some of the issues with the vetting tools and the disconnects we have, it all really kind of centers around that of how do you bring in a little bit of that bias in the right places of being able to like really, check that like, hey, this guy doesn't have 10 other carriers, or like maybe he doesn't, but maybe there's a legitimate reason. Like it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing right off the rip either. And figuring out like all the possible combinations of that. I think that's that's the real problem we got to solve basically.
What was it like if you look at some of the vetting stuff that you've seen, within your software, when you're going through your software, what are some of those things that like the most extreme case of like, what in the heck is this? What was like the most extreme things that you've seen?
I mean, some of them were like you can really look at the inspection history and you can find trucks that were inspected in like completely different places in the country that like, it doesn't make sense. And like the MCs are changing and like they're swapping between carriers essentially, where it seems really obvious. Like there's something goofy going on here. Like it's not legitimate that, people are running they're running these carriers and like they're getting through the vetting system somehow. And I guess I just continue to be sort of surprised by some of the more obvious stuff we still miss on the day-to-day in most of the vetting platforms, including mine. Like there's nothing in search carriers that would necessarily flag those every single time. I think when you look at like the ELD violation side of things, there's a lot of inspection violations to me that should just be like instant red flags for, people that are manipulating their ELD. Like that's an immediate to me, like you don't want to work with somebody that's manipulating their ELD. It's pretty clear cut. And you see, there's no reason a lot of times that they'll have one bad inspection, they'll be out of service, they'll get it fixed. But if you dig through, it's like, wow, that violation was pretty rough. And people are still running with that carrier. And it's like, it's hard to be completely objective there. What do you say? Was it like one bad hire that they fired that like was cheating the system? And now it's like, okay, I don't know. It's hard to decipher.
Yeah, but let's be a little, let's back up a little bit, because I think that there is some unfairness when it comes down to being objective versus subjective, like you said, right? And what I mean by that is that, you can be a brand new carrier, doing everything right. And, you have 3 inspections. 2 of those inspections, you got put out of service. One of them you got put out of service because of a tire issue. The other one you got put out of service because of a brake issue, right? So these things put you out of service. But the crazy the way that what happens when you get amplified, when you amplify this, now if you take a picture of the side of my truck because you said, hey, I went speeding past you in the left lane, you took a picture of my truck and you ran it in search carriers and it says I got a 66% out of service rate. Aha, I told you he was a bad carrier. Like, that's the problem that I have when people don't take data and match data with a little bit of subjectivity, like you said. But then when you look at subjectivity, man, subjectivity is going to have bias. People are going to be biased as what they want.
Yeah. Yeah. There's definitely a bit of that. Like, people are going to use the data to paint the picture they want to see. And I guess one of the things with search carriers that I really want to do, like I said, is try to stay as objective as possible. I really want it to be sort of a data playground where you can, all the data is there. I don't necessarily want to try to gatekeep if somebody is going to like use that data to paint a certain picture, as much as like train people to understand it. So like if somebody's on search carriers and they're like, hey, look, they got a 66% out of service, blah, blah, blah. I want the next person to be able to open that page up and go, yeah, but like, it's not for a bad reason. Like, it's right here on the same page.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like, a big piece of that is just like informing the general public of like, what do all these different things mean, kind of putting it in one place and like helping them to understand. Cause you know, a lot of the traffic on search carriers is actually people that aren't from the industry that are seeing these news articles on crashes. I actually saw somebody reference it on my Facebook a couple of weeks ago. That was like somebody not in logistics, and they like referenced an article that had search carriers, and I was like, this is the coolest thing.
Yeah.
And it really like, it clicked for me. I was like, oh my gosh, like all these people, they don't know anything about like inspections or like a flat tire versus ELD manipulation and what hours of service means or any of that. And, you know, search carriers, I think, has an obligation to like explain that in a way that general public can come onto a page and understand exactly what you're talking about and see that like, hey, it's 66% out of service, but actually like here's like, it was totally fine. As a flat tire, they got it fixed. It's not a big deal. And I think that's stuff that, you know, I'm definitely striving for.
So what's search carriers from that perspective? And I'm glad you made that an issue or a point. So what search carriers do you see in the future that you're going to do from a company perspective to say, hey, we got an obligation with the data that we have. We have an obligation to make sure that people understand, right? We understand this data. What can people expect to see, you know, from Garrett and the team, whether, you know, webinar or whatever that may look like? What can the team expect to see from the search carriers team?
Yeah. So, you know, obviously more and more just, you know, UI updates, new tools, pages, things like I said, just being able to understand that data. There's still more data that hasn't been pulled in there. There's more data, new data sources I'm trying to pull in. I mentioned on X the other day, I just spun up a new data processing server. Just, you know, spent the money to build this new system to essentially allow processing millions and millions of rows of data to be able to standardize them and provide them to the public as data points that they can use for their reporting. And so, you know, more of that, just more of, hey, you want a data point, we'll put it in the system. And, you know, also helping, you know, teaming up with Playbook and saying like, hey, what are ways we can go to small carriers and say like, hey, these are great things you should do for your digital footprint. Or like, hey, here's a place where we can add like a walkthrough on how you can, you know, submit like the data queue against an inspection that you had. There was a violation, you know, just different things like that we can do to just like help both sides. I don't think the last thing we want to do with search carriers is pick a side. You know, we're not trying to say like, we're not going to talk to carriers. We're not going to talk to brokers. Like, we're truly just trying to bring attention to the problems in the space of there are definitely, you know, issues with fraud and different things we need to address, bringing attention to those, informing the public on like how they can do their own research and making it accessible. So, you know, everything that's just that we can do on that path, that's what we're going to do. So, you know, like I said, that's one of the things like when you first reached out about like, hey, let's do something with search carriers and Playbook, I was pumped because that's something that's been top of mind. It's really hard to, you know, everybody talks about wanting to serve carriers and sell to carriers and like help carriers out, but the money is really at the broker and the shipper side, you know, just being completely honest. Like it's hard to sell into carriers because there's no money there. And so it's top of mind to me. Like, what are things we can do that help carriers out that, you know, isn't going to cost them $100 $200 a month and be unreasonable? Like, what are ways we can help out? And so, again, that's why I'm super excited. We work on the playbook and just helping out the carrier side of, maybe we'll try to do some highlighting carriers in the future and like different tutorials, webinar stuff is great. Anything like that we can do. That's what I want to do.
So, a lot of carriers, they don't track their performance. They don't track their metrics. They're scared to death of technology. What are they missing, obviously, from your perspective? What are the most key components that they're missing by not doing that?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously tracking your performance and like your metrics for your scores from the CSA and all those, your measures, that's super important. So, I've actually been working with a couple of different compliance companies lately to like understand, I've been in the industry for over 10 years, but I'm always learning every week. There's tons of stuff that I don't know. I'm definitely not like an expert in all the different laws and like couldn't rattle stuff off to you. And so I've been working with some compliance companies the last like couple months to understand like what are things that they're teaching carriers when they're doing, mock audits, like what are data points they're bringing to the front and like feedback they're giving. And so those are things that I'm going to be pulling into search carriers and like the future releases to give, carriers access to having those mock audits more firsthand and being able to see what they need to track. But obviously tracking your company is huge. On search carriers, you can go in and sign up to get at least in your inspection data and any update alerts. So you can get an email as soon as one of your trucks gets inspected, usually within like a day or two. It's really fast just to like stay on top of that. If you want to see those reports when they come through, if you've got a few trucks. And also monitoring your change to your data. You might get a security breach, like a data security issue, where one of your accounts gets compromised, you don't realize it. And being on top of when like your information changes with the FMCSA is huge. You don't want to like be one of the people that has to send that email out and says, hey, we got hacked and we've been posting on that and it's not us and all that stuff. So staying on top of your data security, following best practices, but also having the alerts in place to know before you end up, having your MCUs to scam somebody. I think it's all very important. So I think a lot of times carriers, especially small carriers, they're already stretched so thin that can be kind of like last thing that they're thinking about. But it is very important to protect yourself in that way.
Now, when you think about the FMCSA website as a whole, and gathering the data as a whole, in terms of the complexity of it, what would be search carriers' position on, hey, you know what, we're wanting to make it easier because of this. In comparison, if you would compare the two, because, most people, you got a lot of people that's saying that, hey, well, search carriers information, I can just go to the FMCSA website and get it. So what would be your rebuttal to that?
Yeah, they're totally right. I actually have links directly to some of the FMCSA websites on search carriers. And so a lot of that data is directly pulled from various places across Safer and LNI and, CSA. The real like benefit of search carriers is that it's all aggregated into one place and standardized. Anybody that's been in any of those data sets knows it can be extremely difficult to understand. And so, there's been a lot of time and effort that's gone into making it, obviously putting it together so there's one page where you can pull it all up. The search is extremely fast. If you try to search a carrier by, for example, you want to find a company by the name of the agent on the company. With search carriers, you can just type in their name, they'll come up first result. Type in their email, it'll come up first result. Those are all things we're adding on top. And then obviously adding the explainers, we were talking about earlier of like, what do the different inspections mean? And, what is the data actually saying? It can be really hard to decipher. And it's usually like 4 different pages you got to go to on the government sites. And they look like they were built in the 90s because they probably were. And and so, just making it, again, accessible, easy to understand, things like that. And, on top of that, like I mentioned, there's a lot of data that we're pulling in now. There's even some stuff out there today that are additions to, they're not just the FMCSA data, but they're also, VIN level detail of like, what is the make and model of trucks and things like that are enhanced data we're adding on top of the FMCSA data sets that, again, help you really get like the full picture.
So, there's a big movement these days that's driven by 2 letters, an A and an I. And with that movement has come a lot of scrutiny, but I wouldn't even say scrutiny. I would say uncertainty more than anything. When it comes down to development, when it comes down to technology, and what is that going to look like? How do you see AI changing what we do now and what things look like today? Being that you come from tech, so I would expect that you're going to have more insight than the next. What does the next, I don't know, 3 years look like? 4 years?
Yeah, it's really interesting. You know, I don't. My take on it is there is a lot of places where AI is helpful. You know, especially when you look at like unstructured data and getting insights out of that, where you've got like an email and being able to turn that into like, what is the email saying? Is it, you know, is it a quote, things like that, and turning that into some kind of programmatic thing. That's where AI is really, you know, the most useful. There's obviously all the AI phone calls going on right now, with mixed reviews. You know, there are certain cases where that could make sense, you know, as like a fallback in certain places or whatever. But you know, it's one of those where everybody sees an issue and they go, we'll just throw AI at it right now because we're just like we're at the top of the hype cycle. So I think the majority of the use cases that you're seeing AI today won't exist in 5 years,
Really?
because most of them will be replaced by more robust solutions that aren't so like AI driven first. But there are definitely going to be scenarios where we are using AI. It's, you know, people talk about like the chat bot, right? And like we've had chat bots forever and it's really just everything's just a chat bot now. There is an advantage to you think about the technology of having that assistant that's like on your phone 24/7 that you can just say, hey, you know, when's that load going to get there? Hey, what are the loads I can get coming out of Cincinnati, Ohio? You know, that is a great use case for AI where it's taking your unstructured, you know, discussion, communications, talking to it, you know, voice to text, and turning that into what would be, you know, looking it up on the load board, things like that. That's a great case for AI where we can't really do that alternatively. I think when you talk about, you know, automating freight end to end, there's still a lot of question marks. A lot of the same issues that we had around digital freight brokerages are still unanswered. And so I think we're going to see a similar, I'll be on record for this. So, you know, people quote this and tell me I'm wrong in 5 years, but, I think we're going to see a lot of the same bubble of digital freight brokerages where everybody's trying to complete the freight cycle from end to end with AI. And at the end of the day, some guy can go start a brokerage in his basement and underbid you and win that freight and know the guy and like be a person. And he's going to win that freight every time. And you're ultimately just not going to be able to compete with that at a large scale. And what we're seeing is similar to digital freight brokerages where we've got all this VC money flowing into the industry and saying like, hey, here's a ton of money to go build AI and subsidize it for you to get it into these brokerages to automate their systems. And we're going to turn around eventually one day and say, oh, you know what? The margins aren't there. We're just losing a ton of money because it costs a lot of money to run AI at that scale. And it's going to be similar to the digital freight brokerage where it's like we can never break profitable because like the cost is just too high. And it's just cheaper for somebody to sit in that chair and do it still. And so I think what we'll see is a lot more like point solutions around AI and less of like the whole thing getting automated. But I do think we'll see individuals, the productivity of an individual exponentially increase. You know, me as an engineer, I use AI every day to help me with programming. I mean, there's some things that are tasks that are so small, I could just say, hey, AI, go fix that bug, and it'll go fix that problem in the code. I don't have to touch it. And so like, there's cases like that where that will absolutely translate into, you know, running freight of like places where you can ask AI to go file that report for you or run the math on a lane and it'll go do that for you. But then you're going to have to go make that decision because you're going to have to put, you know, your opinion and your preferences into that the AI just will never fully solve for. So yeah, that's kind of where I think it's going to all go. But now I'm on record with it. So somebody tell me I'm wrong in 5 years. Like I said,
bookmark this particular episode. But that's, you know, I kind of agree with that too, man, because, you know, I didn't even think about it from the standpoint of like, you know, well, what we think is good now might get scrapped because this was our over ambition with what AI can do. And like, if you think about this, and now I'm going on record, which I'm not going on record, but it's like, you think about like the AI, like phone calls, they're the most annoying. Like, let me tell you something. If I call a call center, if I call, you know, American Express, and there is not a real person answering it, you got to go through all of these. It's just annoying. Like, you can't make it any better, in my opinion. Like, let me talk to a person with feelings, a real person that, you know what I mean? I just don't know. And then I guess my next question for you is that now you've also seen a surge in vibe coding, which for those who don't know, it's like some fun coding, AI coding, where you can build applications by just, you know, following prompts and things like that. But it's so buggy. Like, it is extremely buggy. What are your thoughts on where that could be? in the next couple of years?
Yeah, I think that is going to. I do think that has legs. At the end of the day, my X handle is Garrett Makes, and even before AI, what I've always said is like engineering and like programming is always a means to an end for me. Like I like building stuff. I tinker with stuff in my garage. Like programming is simply a tool for me to build products for people. And so when you talk about like vibe coding, I think it's awesome because the people that know how to solve the problem the best are generally the people that have the problem. And so giving the tools to, that person that's got that issue they're running into every day at work, and them having the ability to, okay, tonight I'm going to go work on, Replit or use Grok or whatever and like build something out to solve this. I think it's awesome. As with anything, people are taking it too far and saying like, you know what, I'm going to build a whole TMS and I'm going to vibe code it. And it's going to just like my whole business is going to run on it. And maybe it'll be there in the future. It'll probably eventually get somewhere in the vicinity of that. But today it's not there. What it's best for is you've got like a great example is I was building something recently looking through all these data sets that are available through the government. And all they have for you in these data sets are literally just like huge walls of text, right? It's just like, here's the URL and the description. It's possible to read. So I just went on Claude and I said, hey, generate me an HTML page that looks nice that I can scroll through for this. Mm-hmm. And it did it for me. And it was like, okay, cool. In like 3 minutes, I turned around a nice page I can open to scroll through this. And I just sat there while it wrote the code. Like that's a great example of like a really point solution to a little problem I had that I just vibe coded real quick and it saved me tons of time. Yeah. And so doing those kinds of things in your day-to-day, that's an awesome use of vibe coding. And you're talking about building a whole business application, you're probably getting a little too far into the weeds and you maybe pull back a little bit and look for help. But yeah.
You got a lot of people, and to your point, and the reason why I mention that because you got people saying, hey, I'm a vibe code a TMS, or I'm a vibe code, an end-to-end, solution that'll help me, manage my compliance, but it has limitations. And ultimately with anything, it's going to have those such limitations. And it's important to understand that when it comes down to technology. And firsthand, better than that because you're on the engineering, you're on the coding side. So that some of that stuff you're still going to have somebody that knows what they're doing in place.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It is great, like I said, to see some of the things people come up with. Them being able to just like build a website you can click around in is very cool. Still, it's if you had shown somebody the technology we have today 5 years ago, they'd have been like, "What the heck? Yeah. This is crazy! Like this is insane! Like how is this possible?" Yeah. So we've come a long way.
We got a long way to go. We come a long way. I mean, it kind of goes back to like I was just thinking about the other day. I'm like, man. I don't even remember when Wi-Fi became a thing. I just always remember having Wi-Fi. But then I also remember when I was on dial-up internet. I just don't remember the transition between dial-up to all of a sudden now we've got Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and all this other stuff. It'll just come to a point where, oh man, wow, we got driverless trucks. That's really interesting. Like it's like it's one of those things that's really, really interesting. So now and as we kind of wrap up, and especially I just want to make sure that people really understand the purpose, the goal behind search carriers. What is the why? Like, what is your true why behind search carriers? And where do you see search carriers in the next 5 years?
Yeah. So, like I said, search carriers really just kind of came out of necessity of building to the FMCSA. And what it really showed me was people don't understand that data. The data is extremely hard to get together and look through. And so the goal of search carriers is ultimately to just be a sort of like a data playground for, anybody that wants to look into, motor carrier data. You want to research a carrier, you want to understand data about a carrier, you want to go vet a carrier. All of those tools, I want it to be, you go to search carriers, you can look that carrier up, you can read through it, you can understand what the data points are, ask questions if you need to, like hover different sections, you'll have the explainers there. And basically just kind of be a one-stop shop for anything motor carrier data related, and not just be like a gatekeeper of that data, but really like, raise the tide, raise all boats, like really teaching everybody to understand that data and really training them on what it means. Because a lot of the systems out there, they'll give you the green light, but I think a lot of people neglect to understand like why. And so with search carriers, I want them to understand the why of what does this data really mean. And so, what is the why of search carriers? What is it for? It's really, I think, just training people on that data, making them understand and making it accessible. We'll always have a free plan on search carriers. You can go on there without even signing up and look at a ton of the information. And we'll always have cheap plans. We have a $19 a month plan that'll give you 80% of the functionality, be able to see all the inspection data, sign up for alerts. Like, no, most of the functionality is all in there. So in 5 years, I think just building out different tools for different people, helping small carriers, maybe more ways to highlight small carriers, more ways for them to like find the how to have a good digital footprint and like claim their profiles and more of that side of things. And, just finding ways to, hopefully, I'd love to find a way to work with the FMCSA and push them forward of like, hey, this is what, a safer system could look like for, either through me or somebody else, or what their next version looks like, hopefully inspire some people over there to say, hey, this is how people can understand that data better. Those are all top of mind for me and kind of like where I want to go.
Well, I think that ultimately, I think these are all great places to go. And I think that, most importantly, in order to get there, you just sometimes it's got to take a little bit of amplification to show what you're able to do. And I think that unfortunately and fortunately at the same time, a lot of these high profile incidents that have taken place has really helped put more limelight on to the importance of having instant data. It's putting a limelight on, hey, how can I get data faster and much more prevalent and easier for me to be able to digest that data? And then at the same time, it's almost like empowering, right? Because now you're empowering the motoring public with information that they didn't have. Well, let me back up. They did have, it was just so messy on how to get it. Now all I got to do is just, open up searchcarriers.com. I know who owns that truck, how many inspections that they had. I know who owns the company. I know the VINs, the trailers, the tractors. I knew everything about this particular company that I possibly can. Whereas before, you can get it, but like you got to go away through the cornhole maze to get to it, right? So I think that you created a software and a platform to make it easy, make it simple for people to be able to get the information that's necessary to them. But then also, I think also it helps shine a light on the importance of being able to have that data. So continue to evolve as you go through, because I think that the more it'll make you, the more easier the data is to digest, the better off it's going to be for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And, hopefully the FMCSA, can keep working on their data sets and give us more and more information that we can put together. And,
I have never seen an agency move as slow as that agency ever. So good luck with that. And I hope that we get there too. Well, so if anybody wanted to connect with you, try out the product, give feedback on the product, how would they do so?
Yeah, just go to searchcarriers.com. You can, like I said, you don't have to log in. Just go on there. You can start searching carriers, look at information. There's a feedback button at the bottom there. Otherwise, you can also find me on X, which is just Garrett with 2 R's and 2 T's _makes, or you can find me on LinkedIn, just Garrett Allen. And yeah, you can definitely go check it out and let me know what you think. Like I said, I'm always adding features on there. I love getting the feedback. I usually have stuff turned around within a couple hours most of the time. So don't hesitate to reach out.
And love the partnership as it starts to gain traction with Search Carriers and Playbook and the things that we're going to be doing here soon in the future. And huge thanks to Garrett Allen for keeping it real about trust data and how to really rise above the noise in a crowded, unstable marketplace. So if you're wondering why, hey, why is data the way it is, or why you keep getting passed up, or how to kind of finally lock in some consistency, just go back and replay this one. Garrett didn't just drop opinions, he dropped a playbook for us as well. So remember, your data is your sales pitch, use it. Your data is yours. And if you got any value out of this episode, do us a favor, like, share, and subscribe wherever you listen. And head over to freightwaves.com/playbook to get on the newsletter list. That's where we deliver weekly insights, breakdowns, and tools to help you run better businesses and not just a truck. This is The Long Haul, and I hope to see y'all in the next episode. Take care, everybody.